The night I met Adrian Blackwood, I learned that the distance between two people can be measured in dollars, but destiny doesn't care about numbers. The rain tapped softly against the towering glass windows of the Blackwood Grand Hotel as I adjusted the cuffs of my black server uniform for what felt like the 100th time that evening. My feet already hurt, and my shift had barely begun. The polished marble floors reflected the golden glow of chandeliers so massive they looked like floating galaxies suspended above Manhattan's wealthiest people. Everywhere I looked, there were diamonds catching the light, designer gowns sweeping across the floor, and tailored suits that probably cost more than my car. I tightened my grip on the silver tray balanced in my hands and reminded myself why I was here. Rent, utilities, Noah's medical bills. Dreams were expensive, and reality didn't offer payment plans. Emily, champagne service, my supervisor whispered as she rushed past me. I nodded and stepped into the crowd, moving carefully between conversations that sounded like they belonged in a completely different universe. People discussed investment portfolios the way my friends talked about grocery prices. They laughed about vacations that cost more than my annual income. I kept my smile professional. Invisible. That was the safest way to survive nights like this. Most of the guests never looked directly at servers anyway. To them, we were part of the furniture, a moving piece of the scenery. I was halfway across the ballroom when a woman wearing enough diamonds to blind a small city snapped her fingers at me. "You," she said without even making eye contact. "Come here." I approached and lowered my tray slightly. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at my name tag as though reading something unpleasant. "Emily." Her lips tightened. I dropped my bracelet. I looked down. A silver bracelet rested beside her chair. Perfectly visible. Perfectly reachable. She could have picked it up herself in 2 seconds. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and waited. The people around her watched quietly. I understood immediately. This wasn't about the bracelet. It was about reminding everyone where I belonged. My stomach tightened. I could almost hear my mother's voice from years ago. "Hold your head high, sweetheart. No one gets to decide your worth except you." I took a slow breath. Then I looked directly at the woman. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said calmly. "I serve drinks, not humiliation." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence spread across the table. One man nearly choked on his wine. The woman's face turned crimson. For a second, I wondered if I had just lost my job. Then something strange happened. The room seemed to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to notice that conversations nearby had started fading. Eyes were turning toward the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. I followed their gaze. A man stood at the top of the stairs. Tall, motionless, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. The golden light caught the sharp lines of his face as he looked down over the crowd with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Yet somehow every person in the room seemed aware of him. A quiet ripple moved through the guests. Respect, fear, curiosity, maybe all three. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know why everyone suddenly seemed nervous. I only knew one thing. The moment his eyes met mine across that crowded ballroom, something deep inside me whispered that my life was about to change forever. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt long enough for every heartbeat in the ballroom to become audible. I stood frozen beside the table, still holding my silver tray, while the woman who had summoned me looked as though she could not decide whether to be offended or embarrassed. Neither option seemed pleasant. Around her, guests suddenly became fascinated with their champagne glasses. No one wanted to be caught watching. No one wanted to be caught involved. I lowered my eyes and took a step backward, ready to disappear before my supervisor could fire me on the spot. Then I heard the sound of polished dress shoes moving across marble. Slow, measured, confident. The atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations faded. Smiles tightened. People moved aside without being asked. I glanced up and saw the man from the staircase descending toward the ballroom floor. Every step seemed deliberate. Every movement carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His black suit fit perfectly. His dark hair was neatly styled. His expression revealed nothing, yet somehow everyone around him looked nervous. I did not know his name, but apparently everyone else did. The woman beside me straightened in her chair. The confidence she had displayed moments earlier vanished so quickly it was almost startling. The man stopped several feet away from our table. His eyes moved briefly across the guests before settling on me. For one strange second, The noise of the ballroom disappeared. There was only the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the steady rhythm of my pulse. Then he spoke. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was calm, not loud. Yet every person at the table immediately became uncomfortable. "No problem at all," the woman answered quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." The man continued looking at her. "A misunderstanding?" She forced a smile. "The server and I were simply discussing something. I wanted to leave. More than anything, I wanted to escape this conversation and return to carrying champagne where I belonged." But the man did not seem interested in letting the moment disappear. His gaze shifted toward the bracelet still lying on the floor beside the chair. Then back to the woman. "I see." 3 simple words. Nothing more. Yet the woman immediately bent down and picked up the bracelet herself. Several guests looked away. Others suddenly became very interested in their phones. The man nodded once, as if a matter had been resolved. Then his attention returned to me. "What is your name?" My throat felt dry. "Emily Carter." "How long have you worked here, Emily Carter?" "Almost 11 months. Do you enjoy it?" The question surprised me. "Most days." A faint expression touched his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite amusement. "Most days" is honest. I did not know how to respond. Before I could think of anything, another guest approached him and began speaking about some business matter. The moment broke. The spell disappeared. Yet as he turned away, he paused briefly and looked back at me. "Keep your head up, Emily." Then he walked away. I stood motionless long after he disappeared into the crowd. Nobody said a word. Nobody apologized. But nobody asked me to pick up anything from the floor either. And for the rest of the evening, I could not stop wondering why the most powerful man in the room had remembered my name. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of crystal glasses, polite smiles, and questions I could not answer. Every time I crossed the ballroom, I became aware of people glancing at me before quickly looking away. Word traveled fast in rooms like this. One unusual moment could become the evening's favorite conversation. By 11 o'clock, my shoulders ached from carrying trays, and my cheeks hurt from smiling. I was counting the minutes until I could finally go home when my supervisor appeared beside me. "Emily," she said quietly, "the event director wants to see you." My stomach dropped. There it was. The consequence. I followed her through a hallway lined with framed photographs of celebrities and politicians who had visited the hotel over the years. The carpet muffled every footstep. The farther we walked from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. By the time we reached the executive offices, I could hear my own breathing. "Go in," my supervisor said. "They are waiting." They. Not he. Not she. They. Somehow that made it worse. I knocked softly and stepped inside. The office was larger than my apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the rain. Bookshelves filled one wall. Modern artwork covered another. Behind a massive desk sat a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. He looked up from a tablet and smiled politely. "Emily Carter." "Yes, sir. Please sit." I remained standing. I would rather stand. His smile widened slightly. "Interesting." He set the tablet down. "Do you know who owns this hotel?" "No, sir." "Adrian Blackwood." The name landed heavily in the silence. Somehow I was not surprised. A man like that did not look like an employee. He looked like the person who signed the checks. "Mr. Blackwood requested that I speak with you." My pulse quickened. Did I do something wrong? Actually, quite the opposite. He leaned back in his chair. "He believes you handled yourself professionally this evening." I stared at him. For several seconds I could not think of a response. I was not trying to cause trouble. That is precisely what impressed him. The man folded his hands together. Most people in this city either surrender their dignity or weaponize it. Very few protect it without creating a spectacle. I thought about the woman with the bracelet, about the embarrassment, about the eyes that had followed me from the staircase. None of it made sense. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Mr. Blackwood wishes to offer you something." Every instinct immediately became suspicious. Life had taught me that offers from powerful people usually came with invisible strings attached. What kind of offer? A scholarship. I blinked. "Eh, what?" "Your employment records indicate that you attend evening business classes. You have maintained excellent grades while working full-time." My throat tightened. I had never told anyone at work about those classes. "How do you know that?" "Mr. Blackwood believes in knowing the people who work in his properties." The answer felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Too convenient. I looked out the window toward the rain-covered city lights. Somewhere beyond those buildings sat overdue bills, Noah's prescriptions, and a future that felt farther away every month. A scholarship could change everything. Yet something inside me hesitated. And what does he want in return? The silver-haired man became very quiet. Then he smiled again. That was exactly the question he predicted you would ask. The silver-haired man opened a folder and slowly turned it toward me. Inside were documents printed on thick, cream-colored paper. Tuition coverage, academic fees, certification costs, even transportation assistance. The numbers alone made my head spin. I earned less in a year than what sat on those pages. For a moment, I simply stared. Then I pushed the folder back across the desk. No, the man blinked. No. I appreciate the offer, but no. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You have not even read the details. I do not need to. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Nothing that valuable comes without expectations. For several seconds, he studied me carefully. Then he reached for a phone resting on the corner of the desk. I suspected this might happen. Before I could ask what that meant, he pressed a button. Mr. Blackwood, he said calmly. You were correct. Silence. Then he nodded once. Understood. He ended the call and stood. Would you follow me? Every alarm bell in my mind started ringing. Where? Someone would like to speak with you personally. I should have left. I should have thanked him for his time and walked out of the hotel. Instead, curiosity won. 5 minutes later, we entered a private elevator that required a key card just to operate. The ride felt endless. The city lights drifted farther below us as the elevator climbed higher into the building. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel walls. Tired eyes, loose strands of blonde hair escaping my ponytail, shoes that had survived one too many shifts. I looked completely out of place. The elevator doors opened onto a private floor. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No phones ringing. No employees rushing around. Just quiet. The second thing I noticed was the view. Manhattan stretched beyond the glass walls like a sea of gold and silver lights beneath the rain. Standing near the window was Adrian Blackwood. His back faced us at first. One hand rested in his pocket while the other held a glass of sparkling water. He looked less like a businessman and more like someone carrying the weight of an entire city on his shoulders. The silver-haired man quietly excused himself and left. Suddenly, it was just the two of us. Adrian turned. His expression remained unreadable. You declined the scholarship. It was not a question. Yes. Why? I folded my arms. Because I do not know you. A faint smile appeared. That is reasonable. Most people do not offer strangers thousands of dollars without a reason. And most strangers do not refuse. I hated that he had a point. Rain streaked across the glass behind him. Somewhere far below, traffic moved through the city like streams of light. Adrian took a few slow steps closer. Not enough to invade my space. Just enough that I could see the intelligence behind his eyes. What if I told you there were no conditions? I would not believe you. The smile returned for a second, then disappeared. Good. That answer surprised me. Good. Blind trust is dangerous, Emily. He looked toward the city before meeting my eyes again. Keep questioning people, especially people with power. I should have felt intimidated standing there. Instead, I felt confused. Nothing about this conversation matched my expectations. Then Adrian said something that made my heart stop. Your brother Noah is doing better after his last surgery, correct? Every muscle in my body went rigid. I had never mentioned Noah. Not once. My mind went completely blank. The city lights beyond the glass blurred as I stared at Adrian Blackwood. For a second, I honestly wondered if I had misheard him. Noah. My brother's name sounded impossibly loud inside the quiet room. How do you know Noah? I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Adrian did not seem offended. If anything, he looked like he expected the reaction. Because when I invest in people, I prefer understanding their circumstances. You investigated me. The words felt cold on my tongue. I learned about you, he corrected. There is a difference. Not from where I am standing. A muscle moved slightly along his jaw before he nodded. Fair enough. I should have left right then. Every instinct told me to walk away from the man who somehow knew details about my family, my education, and my financial struggles. But another part of me needed answers. Noah had spent months recovering after a complicated surgery. The hospital visits alone had nearly drained our savings. Very few people knew the full story. What exactly do you know? I asked quietly. Adrian set his glass on a nearby table. I know your brother works harder than his doctors recommend. I know he pretends he is stronger than he feels because he does not want you worrying. And I know you have been carrying responsibilities that should never belong to someone your age. The accuracy of those words hit harder than I expected. Noah always smiled through the difficult days. Always insisted he was fine, even when I knew he was exhausted. That does not explain why you care. Adrian looked out toward the skyline. Maybe I recognize determination when I see it. I crossed my arms. You do not know me. No, he admitted. Not yet. The answer unsettled me more than if he had argued. Rain continued sliding down the windows in silver lines. Somewhere below, the city kept moving. Taxis, restaurants, office workers heading home. Normal lives. This room felt very far away from all of that. What do you actually want from me? I asked. Nothing. I laughed before I could stop myself. Nobody offers opportunities worth tens of thousands of dollars for nothing. Adrian's expression softened slightly. You are right. At least that sounded honest. Then tell me the real reason. For the first time all evening, he hesitated. The pause was brief, but I noticed it. Because somebody once gave me a chance when I did not deserve one. His voice had changed. Quieter. More distant. And it altered the course of my life. I studied him carefully. There was a story hidden behind those words. One he clearly had no intention of sharing. Yet for the first time, the powerful man standing in front of me seemed less like an untouchable figure and more like a human being carrying old memories. Then a phone vibrated somewhere nearby. Adrian glanced at the screen, and his expression immediately shifted. Not angry, not worried, focused. Whatever message he received clearly mattered. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at me again. You should get home, Emily. I frowned. That is it. For tonight. He walked toward the door before stopping. The scholarship remains available. Whether you accept it or not is entirely your decision. I opened my mouth to respond, but he spoke one final sentence before leaving. Just remember something. Pride can protect people. Sometimes it can also trap them. Then he disappeared through the doorway, leaving me alone with the rain, the city lights, and a question I could not stop asking myself. How had a man like Adrian Blackwood become interested in someone like me at all? The subway ride home felt longer than usual. Maybe because my mind refused to stay quiet. The train rattled beneath the city while reflections flickered across the dark windows, but all I could think about was Adrian Blackwood. His words, his questions, the strange way he seemed to know things about my life that most people overlooked. By the time I reached my apartment building, midnight had come and gone. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren somewhere across the city. I climbed 3 flights of stairs and unlocked the door. The familiar scent of coffee and laundry detergent greeted me immediately. Home. Small. Worn. Safe. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with a textbook open in front of him. He looked up and smiled. You are late. The gala ran longer than expected. He studied my face. Something happened. Noah had always been able to read me, even as children. I dropped my bag onto a chair and laughed softly. Is it that obvious? To me? Always. I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water. Do you know who owns the hotel? No, a man named Adrian Blackwood. Noah nearly dropped his pen. Blackwood. I paused. You have heard of him? Everyone has. His expression shifted into something thoughtful. Mostly business articles. Real estate. Investments. Foundations. That kind of thing. I sat across from him. He offered me a scholarship. Noah stared. A scholarship? A huge one. And I took a sip of water. I said no. He closed his eyes. Of course you did. What is that supposed to mean? Emily, you once argued with a parking officer for 20 minutes because you thought he sounded arrogant. He was arrogant. That is not the point. I laughed despite myself. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. Noah leaned back in his chair. Why did you refuse? Because it felt strange. Did he ask for anything? No. Then maybe it was exactly what he said it was. I looked toward the window where rain continued tapping against the glass. People like him do not notice people like us. Noah became quiet. Maybe that is the problem. I frowned. What? Maybe you decided who he was before you actually knew him. His words lingered in the room. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I found myself remembering Adrian's expression when he talked about receiving a second chance years ago. It had sounded real, honest, human. The next morning arrived too quickly. I barely slept. By 7:30, I was already walking toward campus for my business management class. The air smelled clean after the rain. Students hurried across the sidewalks carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Everything felt normal again. Familiar. Predictable. Then I reached the administration building. A receptionist stood waiting near the entrance. "Emily Carter?" she asked. "Yes. There is a package for you." Confused, I accepted a small envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. No return address. No explanation. Just my name. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a single card. For simple words were written in elegant handwriting. "You deserve the choice." Beneath the message sat a scholarship acceptance form already approved and signed. I stood in the middle of the campus courtyard holding the envelope while students flowed around me like a river. Nobody noticed the girl staring at a scholarship form that could change her entire future. Nobody noticed the way my hands trembled slightly as I read the message again. "You deserve the choice." 4 words. That was all. No pressure. No demand. No contract hidden beneath fine print. Just a choice. The strange thing was that those words stayed with me for the rest of the day. Through lectures. Through group projects. Through lunch that consisted of a granola bar and coffee because my budget had become painfully familiar. By the time evening arrived, I still had not signed the form. The paper sat folded inside my backpack like it weighed 50 pounds. After class, I headed straight to work. The hotel lobby glowed beneath warm lights as guests checked in and out carrying expensive luggage. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before the gala. Yet somehow nothing felt the same. I kept expecting someone to mention Adrian Blackwood. Nobody did. Hours passed. I served drinks, cleared tables, smiled politely. Life continued. Around 9 o'clock, one of the senior managers approached me. "Emily." "Yes." "Private dining room 6 needs assistance." I nodded and grabbed a tray. Private dining rooms usually meant corporate meetings or wealthy families celebrating milestones. Nothing unusual. At least that was what I thought. When I opened the door, I stopped immediately. Adrian sat alone near the window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass behind him. A notebook rested on the table beside a cup of coffee. He looked up from whatever he had been reading. "Good evening, Emily." Somehow hearing my name in his voice felt different than hearing it from anyone else. "I did not know this room was occupied." "It was not," he said calmly, "until I requested it. I should have left." Instead, I stood there holding a tray like I had forgotten how doors worked. Adrian gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit. I am working. Then stand if you prefer." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Against my better judgment, I smiled. "You planned this?" "Yes." The honesty caught me off guard again. "Why?" Adrian closed the notebook. "Because I was curious whether you signed the form." I crossed my arms. "And if I did, then I would congratulate you. And if I did not, then I would still congratulate you for making your own decision." The answer frustrated me because it sounded sincere. I pulled the folded scholarship papers from my bag and placed them on the table. "And signed." Adrian looked at them briefly before meeting my eyes. "You are still deciding." I do not like owing people. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the hotel seemed very far away. Finally, Adrian nodded once. "Neither do I." Something about the way he said it made me wonder how many debts a man like him carried. Then his phone lit up on the table. A photograph appeared on the screen before the notification disappeared. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. A younger Adrian standing beside an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The expression on his face in that picture was completely different. Lighter, happier, human. Adrian quickly turned the phone over, but it was too late. For the first time since meeting him, I realized there were pieces of his story hidden beneath the polished suits, the skyscrapers, and the reputation. And suddenly I wanted to know what they were. For the rest of that shift, I could not stop thinking about the photograph. Not because it revealed anything dramatic. It was just a picture, a simple moment frozen in time. Yet it bothered me because it did not match the version of Adrian Blackwood that existed in my mind. The man in newspapers and business magazines always looked composed, distant, untouchable. The man in that photograph looked like someone who still knew how to laugh. Around midnight, the hotel finally began to quiet down. Guests drifted toward elevators. The lobby emptied. The endless soundtrack of rolling suitcases and polished conversations faded into the background. I was stacking menus near the restaurant entrance when my phone vibrated. "Noah." I answered immediately. "Everything okay?" "Relax," he said, laughing softly. "I am fine." You only call this late when something is wrong. Or when something good happens. That caught my attention. What happened? There was a pause. Remember the internship I applied for last month? I straightened. The one with the engineering firm? They called today. My heart jumped. Noah. I got it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I nearly dropped the menus. You got it. I got it. The smile in his voice was impossible to miss. Part-time. Flexible hours. Good pay. They even mentioned advancement opportunities after graduation. I leaned against the counter. Relief flooded through me so quickly it almost hurt. For years it had felt like life was one unexpected expense away from falling apart. Hearing genuine excitement in Noah's voice felt like sunlight after a long winter. I am proud of you, I whispered. I know. He laughed. You always are. After we hung up, I stood there smiling at nothing. Then I noticed someone sitting alone in the corner of the restaurant. Adrian. He had returned sometime during my phone call. A cup of coffee rested on the table in front of him. His laptop sat open beside it. He appeared completely focused on whatever he was reading. Yet somehow I knew he had noticed me the moment he walked in. The strange thing was that I no longer felt nervous around him. Cautious, yes. Confused, definitely. But not nervous. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked over. Adrian looked up as I approached. Good news? He asked. I blinked. How did you know? You were smiling. He said it as though it were the simplest thing in the world. I sat down across from him before remembering I probably should not do that. Adrian did not seem to mind. My brother got an internship. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared. Not polite. Not calculated. Real. Congratulations. Thank you. Silence settled comfortably between us. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a clear sky. The rain had finally stopped. Adrian closed his laptop. You know, he said quietly, most people spend their lives chasing success. And the lucky ones discover that sharing good news with someone matters more. His words lingered long after he spoke them. And as I looked across the table at the man everyone seemed to admire or fear, I realized something unexpected. Beneath the wealth, the reputation, and the distance that separated our worlds, Adrian Blackwood looked lonely. Over the next 2 weeks, something unusual happened. Adrian Blackwood became part of my routine. Not in the dramatic way people might imagine. There were no grand gestures. No expensive gifts appearing at my door. No attempts to impress me. Instead, he appeared in small moments. A conversation after work. A cup of coffee waiting at a table near the restaurant window. Questions about my classes. Questions about Noah. Questions nobody else ever seemed interested in asking. The strange part was that he listened. Really listened. One Thursday afternoon, I found myself walking across campus with the scholarship form still tucked inside my backpack. I had carried it everywhere for nearly 2 weeks. Every time I thought I had made a decision, doubt appeared and changed my mind again. The fall air felt cooler now. Leaves drifted across the sidewalks while students hurried between buildings. My phone buzzed. A text from Noah. Lunch. I am near campus. 10 minutes later, I was sitting outside a small sandwich shop watching my brother devour a turkey sandwich like he had not eaten in days. The internship is going well. I asked. Better than well. He grinned. My supervisor already trusts me with real projects. Look at you becoming important. Someone has to support you in your old age. I laughed and threw a napkin at him. Then his expression became more serious. Have you made a decision? I knew exactly what he meant. Not yet. Emily. Do not start. I am starting. He leaned forward. You have spent your entire life turning down help because you are afraid people will think less of you. That is not fair. It is completely fair. I opened my mouth to argue and immediately stopped because part of me knew he was right. Noah sighed. You always carry everything alone. Someone had to. Not anymore. The words landed heavily between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Noah smiled softly. You know what I think? I am sure you are about to tell me. I think you are less afraid of the scholarship than you are of the man offering it. My heart skipped. That is ridiculous. Is it? I looked away. Across the street, people moved through their afternoon without realizing my entire emotional balance had just been challenged by my younger brother. That evening I returned to work feeling unsettled. Noah's words followed me everywhere. Around 8 o'clock, I stepped into the employee lounge for a quick break. The television mounted on the wall was playing a business news segment. Normally, I ignored those programs. This time a familiar name caught my attention. Adrian Blackwood. I looked up. A reporter was discussing a charitable foundation funded by his company. Scholarships, medical assistance, community projects. The screen showed photographs of students receiving diplomas, families standing beside new homes, children attending educational programs. I stared in silence. This was not the version of Adrian people whispered about, not the distant billionaire everyone seemed intimidated by. The report ended with a photograph of him standing beside dozens of scholarship recipients. He was smiling, the same genuine smile I had seen when I told him about Noah's internship. And for the first time since receiving that envelope, I found myself wondering whether accepting help was not weakness at all. Maybe sometimes it was trust. 3 days later, I signed the scholarship form. The decision happened quietly. No dramatic speech. No life-changing revelation. Just me sitting alone at my kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning while sunlight slowly crept across the worn wooden surface. Noah was still asleep. The city outside had not fully awakened yet. For a long time I stared at the paper. Then I picked up a pen and signed my name. Emily Carter. Simple. Permanent. Terrifying. The strange thing was that the moment I finished, I felt lighter. Not because my problems disappeared. They did not. Bills still existed. Classes still demanded time. Work still exhausted me. But for the first time in years, the future felt slightly larger than survival. Later that evening, I found Adrian sitting in the same corner of the restaurant where we often talked. He looked up as I approached. Before I could say anything, he studied my face for a moment and smiled. You signed it. I stopped. How do you always know? Because you are smiling again. I shook my head and laughed softly. That is a ridiculous answer. It is also correct. He stood and pulled out a chair. The gesture was simple, respectful. Somehow it mattered more than the expensive opportunities he could provide. I sat down. Thank you. Adrian's expression became thoughtful. You do not owe me thanks. Maybe not, but I am giving it anyway. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he nodded once. You are welcome. Outside the window, evening settled across Manhattan. Lights appeared one by one across the skyline, like stars waking up. The restaurant around us buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses. Yet somehow the table felt isolated from everything else. Safe, comfortable, dangerous in a completely different way. Because I was beginning to enjoy being there. Can I ask you something? I said. You usually do. What happened to the woman in the photograph? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Adrian's eyes shifted toward the window. The change was immediate. Not anger. Not annoyance. Sadness. Real sadness. My mother, he said quietly. She passed away several years ago. Regret hit me instantly. I am sorry. He nodded. So am I. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. The kind created when words are too small for certain memories. Finally, Adrian spoke again. She believed that success meant very little if you forgot how to help people. I remembered the scholarships, the foundation, the community programs. Suddenly pieces started fitting together. That is why you do all of this. Adrian smiled faintly. Partly. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. She would have liked you. My heart stumbled unexpectedly. Nobody had ever said something quite like that before. I looked away first. The city lights blurred beyond the glass. Somewhere inside me, a line I had carefully maintained for weeks began to disappear. Because for the first time, Adrian Blackwood no longer felt like a man from another world. He felt like someone I was beginning to care about. And that realization frightened me far more than any scholarship ever could. The following week should have felt perfect. Classes were going well. Noah loved his internship. The scholarship had removed a weight I had carried for years. And yet something felt different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. One afternoon I was leaving campus when my professor stopped me outside the lecture hall. Emily. Professor Reynolds. He smiled and handed me a folder. You should consider applying. I opened it and immediately froze. It was an invitation to a prestigious leadership program. The kind of opportunity students dreamed about. The kind that accepted only a handful of candidates each year. I am not qualified for this. You are exactly qualified for this. He pointed at the application packet. Your grades are excellent. Your recommendations are strong. Stop deciding what you deserve before other people get the chance. Hours later, those words still echoed in my mind as I walked into the hotel for my evening shift. It seemed everyone had suddenly formed a conspiracy to challenge my view of myself. Around 7 o'clock, I found Adrian in the restaurant. He was reviewing documents while drinking coffee. Somehow the sight had become strangely familiar. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Adrian looked up. "You usually do." I placed the folder on the table. "Do you ever feel like you do not belong somewhere?" His eyes moved briefly to the application before returning to me. "Every day." I blinked. "You?" A faint smile appeared. "You assume confidence and certainty are the same thing." I sat down across from him. "Most people would trade places with you in a heartbeat. Most people only see the surface." He closed the folder and leaned back slightly. "The higher you climb, the more people expect perfection. Eventually they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as an idea." The answer surprised me. "Is that what happened to you?" For a moment, he seemed to consider the question carefully. "Maybe." Silence settled between us. The restaurant lights reflected softly against the windows while the city glowed beyond them. Finally, Adrian glanced at the leadership application. "You should apply." I laughed softly. "That is exactly what my professor said." "Your professor sounds intelligent." "I knew you would say that." Adrian smiled. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something changed. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth disappeared. Not completely, just enough for me to notice. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes." The answer came too quickly. That sounded convincing. Adrian looked away for a second before returning his attention to me. "There are some business matters that require attention." I nodded, but something felt wrong. Over the past several weeks, I had learned to recognize small changes in him. This was not stress. It was concern. Real concern. Yet he clearly had no intention of discussing it. He stood and gathered his documents. "I have to leave." "Okay." Then, unexpectedly, he paused. "Emily." "Yes." "Whatever happens, do not let fear make decisions for you." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone. I watched him disappear through the restaurant entrance. The strange thing was not that he left. The strange thing was the feeling that he had just said goodbye to something neither of us fully understood yet. For 3 days, I did not see Adrian. At first, I told myself it did not matter. People had lives, responsibilities, meetings, travel schedules. The world did not revolve around my expectations. Yet every evening when I walked into the restaurant, part of me looked toward the corner table near the window. Every evening it remained empty. By the 4th day, I stopped pretending the absence did not affect me. No one noticed immediately. "You are staring at your phone again." I looked up from the kitchen table. "I am not." "You absolutely are." He pointed his fork at me. "You have checked it 6 times in the last 10 minutes. Maybe I am expecting an email. Maybe you are terrible at lying." I threw a napkin at him. He laughed and returned to his dinner. Later that night, after my shift ended, I stepped outside the hotel and pulled my jacket tighter against the cool air. Manhattan glittered beneath a clear sky. Traffic rolled past in streams of red and white lights. I started walking toward the subway entrance when a familiar voice called my name. "Emily." I turned so quickly that my bag nearly slipped from my shoulder. Adrian stood across the sidewalk. Relief hit me before I could stop it. Then annoyance immediately followed. "You disappeared." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Good evening to you too." "For days." "I was working." "You always work." The words escaped before I could filter them. Adrian stared at me for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not the polite smile I occasionally saw. An actual laugh. Warm. Genuine. Human. I suppose I deserved that. My irritation weakened instantly. "Where were you?" Adrian became quiet. "Boston. Business." Something like that. The answer felt incomplete, but I sensed he was choosing his words carefully. We started walking without discussing it, side by side beneath the city lights. The night air carried the scent of coffee, rain-soaked pavement, and distant food carts. Ordinary sounds surrounded us. Car horns. Laughter. Footsteps. For the first time since meeting him, Adrian looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. "You seem different," I said. He glanced at me. "Different how?" Like something happened. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he nodded once. "I visited my mother's grave." My chest tightened. Oh, it was her birthday. Suddenly everything made sense. The absence. The sadness I had noticed before he left. The way he had spoken about her. "I am sorry." Adrian looked toward the skyline. "She would have told me to stop working so much." "She sounds smart." She was. We reached a small park overlooking the river. The water reflected thousands of city lights like scattered stars. Adrian stopped near the railing. "Emily." The seriousness in his voice made me look up immediately. What? For a moment, he seemed unsure of something. The uncertainty looked strange on a man who usually appeared completely confident. Then he spoke quietly. You have changed my life more than you realize. My heart forgot how to beat for a second. Before I could respond, a voice called his name from behind us. We both turned. A man in an expensive suit approached quickly, carrying a folder. His expression was tense. Adrian accepted the folder and opened it. The moment his eyes moved across the pages, all warmth disappeared from his face. I had never seen him look like that before, and suddenly I knew that whatever was inside that folder was about to change everything. The man handed Adrian the folder and stepped back without a word. The city lights shimmered across the river while the silence between us suddenly felt heavier than the entire skyline. Adrian read the first page, then the second. His expression remained controlled, but I knew him well enough now to recognize the tension behind it. What is it? I asked quietly. Adrian closed the folder. For a moment, he simply stared at the water. A business decision. The kind that changes things? His eyes found mine. The kind that changes everything. My stomach tightened. Can you tell me? He exhaled slowly. Part of my company wants to move several community programs overseas. Scholarships. Local investments. Funding. I frowned. Why? Because it is more profitable. The answer sounded bitter. For the first time, I understood that being powerful did not mean always getting your way. Sometimes it meant carrying responsibility for choices that affected thousands of people. What are you going to do? Adrian looked toward the city. Fight for what I believe is right. The answer did not surprise me. Not anymore. We stood together watching the river move beneath the lights. Then something inside me finally settled. Weeks ago, I would have seen only the distance between us. The hotel owner and the waitress. The billionaire and the student. The man with everything and the woman struggling to keep up with life. But standing there, none of those labels seemed important. Because beneath them was something much simpler. Two people trying to become better than yesterday. You will win, I said. Adrian smiled faintly. That is a lot of confidence. You taught me something. What is that? Fear should not make decisions. For several seconds he stared at me. Then he laughed softly and shook his head. I suppose I did say that. The wind carried the scent of the river through the park. Somewhere behind us, the city continued moving at full speed. Yet the moment felt strangely still. Adrian took one step closer. Not enough to overwhelm the space between us. Just enough to make the truth impossible to ignore. Emily, he said quietly, there is something I should have told you a long time ago. My heart immediately accelerated. What? He looked directly into my eyes. The night we met, I thought I was helping someone who needed a chance. He paused. I was wrong. I could barely breathe. You were. Adrian nodded. You were the one giving the chance. Emotion tightened my throat. Every memory flashed through my mind. The scholarship, the conversations, the laughter, the nights spent questioning whether I belonged in his world. Adrian, he gently shook his head. You reminded me who I wanted to be. The city lights reflected in the water behind him like thousands of tiny stars. In that moment, I finally understood something. Love was never about eliminating differences. It was about finding someone who saw beyond them. Someone who recognized your worth before you recognized it yourself. Months later, Adrian protected the community programs. Noah graduated. I completed the leadership program. Life remained imperfect, busy, complicated. But whenever people asked how someone like Adrian Blackwood and someone like Emily Carter found their way into the same story, I always thought of that first night beneath the chandeliers. The night I refused to pick up a bracelet from the floor. Because sometimes destiny does not arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a choice. And the smallest choice can change an entire life.